Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our virtual event. Thank you for tuning in to EWC Insights Asia Pacific Political Transitions. My name is Panwin Yoking. I am a research fellow at the East-West Center. And for today's session, we have a presentation from Dr. Courtney Work and Dr. Tim Frewer. And Dr. Courtney Work is an associate professor at National Tsin Chi University. Her research focuses on regions transforming from forest to developed and settled landscapes with interest in the interaction between humans and the non-human world. Her disciplines includes the anthropologies of religion, development, and the environment, as well as history of the Southeast Asian political transformation and contemporary political economy and climate change. Dr. Tim Frewer is a visiting researcher at the Australian National University and also the Center for Khmer Studies. His research focuses on development and climate change projects, as well as livelihood changes in frontier areas. He is based in Cambodia and is currently working on an intangible heritage project in Prelong forest. In their talk this afternoon, it focuses on the arts of resilience, transformation, and historical documentation of Prelong forest in Cambodia. In terms of logistics, today's presentation will be roughly 40 minutes long. Then we will transition to a 20-minute Q&A session. I encourage all attendees to participate by sharing your questions and comments for either Dr. Courtney Work or Dr. Tim Frewer, or both in the Q&A session. And in the Q&A box, and we will try our best to get through as many questions as possible during the Q&A session. Lastly, I would like to make two quick announcements that the next EWC Insight speaker will be Dr. Ming Lee Young, and her talk will be on March 16th at 2 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. And her talk will be focusing on public participation and contested hydropower governance in the Mekong River Basin. And also in our future events, you will see new faces moderating EWC Insights. They will be our new research fellows. And without further ado, over to you, Dr. Courtney Work and Dr. Tim Frewer, to start your presentation.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Panwin, for your kind introduction. And thanks to everyone for joining us here today. Special thanks to the wonderful people at the East-West Center at the University of Hawaii and to Jefferson Fox, who hosted me as a research fellow at the center. The project we introduced today is a part of that fellowship, and it helped launch some new activities involving local research collaborators living in and around Prelong and the Frewer forests. Jamin, can you please share the first screen? Slide. So the project that we introduced today is part of that fellowship involving local research collaborators living in and around the Prelong and the Frewer forests. So it involves these local collaborators, myself, Miriam Stark, and Tim Frewer. Only Tim and I are here today, but Miriam, you are on deck. We'll do this next time. And each of us in this project comes with some different perspectives and different skill sets. And I'll expand upon that a little bit as we go along. It's part of what makes this engaged research such a powerful method. So for me, long-term research into religion and traditional practices, and especially as these manifest in social relationships with the life-giving elements of water and land. So this perspective informs both my investigations and my writing. And when I write with this perspective, the situation takes on a different grammar. So it's different when you view the world as if it is governed not by development banks and nation states, which is what it seems like, but rather governed by the elemental forces. And so what emerges is a kind of a decolonized theory that attempts to present the data in ways that appropriately represent the world that they come from. Data are not disconnected from social space. In order to analyze the data within the social space, methodologically, the research needs to be engaged and collaborative, with all participants working together toward both shared and divergent goals. Now, what we research always comes up from our colleagues living in and around the forests. And as academics, we can add new technologies and techniques, we can reach broader audiences, and we can help train for some desired skills. So I'll proceed in the first section of this talk to discuss the power of this theory method and how we have and will continue to deploy it. Then Tim will give you a view into the position of these forests and their people in relation to their geopolitical histories and some of the strategies people use as they engage with external actors. And then I'll finish with some disturbing, but hopefully thought-provoking insights from this dynamic field site. Next slide, please. So the project we introduced today emerged out of an earlier collaborative investigation, the details of which are important because they inform what we're doing right now. So we were studying the impact of a new high-profile conservation initiative, which is ongoing, and within which large-scale syndicated logging inside the Prelong Wildlife Sanctuary was taking place, as local residents and activists were being excluded from the forest by the Ministry of the Environment. Now, despite this fact being forced into public view, both the logging and the conservation project continue as if nothing's going on, only now they ignore each other instead of working together. Now, so this fact of apparent unconcern for the aggressive consumption of Cambodia's remaining forests on the part of international donors and development banks who continue investments and legitimizing partnerships in the region is of growing concern, and it prompts innovative research methodologies. Now, in the earlier research project with local researchers excluded from their work documenting forest crimes and COVID restricting the access of all researchers, the collaborative activities that we had already established with members of the Prelong forest communities proved to be a very powerful method. So despite the exclusions and restrictions during 2020 and 21, a few extremely talented local researchers continued to gather ground data, clearly documenting the destruction and the individuals involved. One researcher died during these activities, and we miss him terribly, and others were imprisoned and harassed. Now, with this vital grassroots data, external researchers were able to search and connect to relevant regional and global perspectives and share some of this with local researchers, and also work to compile reports, harass bureaucrats, and continue to situate this case study in the larger field of global environmental transformation. So the fiasco of Cambodia's development state does continue, and the implications for this in the lives of our collaborators living in and around these forests is palpable. For the moment, the rest of us only suffer vicariously. Nonetheless, the apathy with which our scary and surprising data was received made it clear that going headlong against the capitalist world eater was not having the desired results. Next slide, please. So our current project is attempting explicitly to move past the carnage. Taking a tip from one of my favorite researchers, Anna Tsing, we are putting our energy into investigating and documenting what continues to grow and thrive in these landscapes blasted by resource extraction. The blasting is not destruction, it is transformation. And pictured here is the hut where a powerful source of chthonic earth energy resides that people call lok takao. And growing under the hut are the termites, whose nests are also known as vectors of chthonic energy and vitality. So working separately, but together, these persistent land-based social actors are significant for all of the researchers in our collective. As an anthropologist, I've been looking at them for some time, along with the many potent places where chthonic energies congeal in the forest. And then Miriam and I started working on a proposal to document pre-Angkorian structures in Prelong, all of which are encountered as potent places, along with certain rock formations, trees, swamps, springs, islands, and hills. local researchers are regularly talking about these places and had made lists of them as sites of power, as sites of cultural heritage, and possible ecotourism in the market economy. Miriam's experiences with archaeology projects in Cambodia had already sparked experiments in engaged research, and this project brings in important elements of intangible heritage that are consistently overlooked in Cambodian archaeology. Our local contributors had also been talking about wanting to create videos and stories documenting their unique history and culture, a sort of a people's history of the region. And this is where Tim comes in, who was willing and quite capable of connecting with local researchers during COVID and gathering the data that I was not able to. And from that, Tim took up the lead researcher position for this project and brings his particular geographer's vision to our work, which he will share with you in a little bit. So Tim has also been honing his skills making story maps. And we're now collaborating by looking past the destructive moments and the current history and into alternative ways of telling the story. Oh, and Jaimin, I'm so sorry, I forgot to tell you that I embedded a video, embedded a link into this slide. Can you switch to the next slide, please? Hopefully I don't ruin our presentation. So I'll prompt you, Jaimin, when I want you to click that link. Hopefully this will work. Sorry about that. So the story, I argue, is also a potent place. And until the present moment, others have been telling the story of Kui history. So I went to the library at CKS with some of our collaborators in and around Prelong to find out what some of the others had to say. And we dug through everything that they had there. And this data will inform a history-focused production. But I want to, and so if we click this link right now, take a peek at the first stage of what we will do with our story maps. So, Jaimin, do you think that we can get that up?
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Sorry about that. So this is just a sneak peek into some of what Tim has been doing with our data that we've been gathering. Okay, so this is just a little bit on some of the tangible heritage places that we have found, places that are both powerful in terms of state society history and powerful from the local perspective. So you can see, if you can zoom out on that map just a little bit, you can see what we have is a map of the region. And it's here on the right? You can see the Tonle Sap Lake. So this is where we are in Cambodia. And you can see the little tiny stub of forest left, but it is still significant forest. And the geo-referenced points, these are all places of power that local researchers have delivered to us, have brought us to, and then we've researched the stories that they have to tell about what is going on in this place. So you can go down and each of the, and so this is an interactive story map. And you can go, if you scroll down, Jaimin, you can see how each place is a different spot of power, long recognized locally with significance for the people who live there. And and we gathered stories. People told us about what these places are and why they're important, and what the long-term relationships are, and what kind of stories they remember about things that have happened at these places. So this is just a kind of a first glimpse. Thanks so much, Jaimin. We can go back to the regular PowerPoint now. So this is just a kind of a first glimpse and a little stub of what we're going to be putting together. We'll be able to embed videos and embed audio recordings and embed other kinds of photographs and map tracks so that we can go from the village to the forest and show where these lines are. And so we think that this is really interesting, and this kind of product, right? This is a communication product with maps and geo-referenced places. This kind of production could only happen with input from multiple levels. And local researchers want to document these sites. And they also want to talk about all kinds of other things, about food and gardens and medicine and the skills that they have, like house building and weaving. And so weaving like practical things like baskets and mats and weaving with leaves. So this interaction of forest knowledge, archaeology, heritage, and a deep history of encounter and persistence within the ebbing and flowing tides of empire begin to emerge in some of these stories. And now Tim is going to give you a little glimpse into what that looks like. So Tim, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Courtney. Sorry, just bear with me 1 second as I share my screen. Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to give a quick outline about Prelong itself, and then I'll go on to look at some of the insights that we've been getting from our local collaborators. So the first thing I think from a geographic perspective, kind of looking at Prelong, is to recognize that in a place like Cambodia, remaining patches of forest are never just merely undisturbed tracts of nature or biodiversity. They're not just kind of places of reserved nature. Forests are always created out of the interactions of states, autonomous farmers, indigenous forest-dependent people, rebels, disease, and commodities. They exist and grow in the cracks of state space and provide a sanctuary for those escaping states and also the oppressive aspects of a capitalist system. So in the case of Prelong, you can kind of see it has this long history of, on the one side, kind of being at the center of old and ancient states, but more recently kind of being on the edge of the modern state. So Prelong has recently become a place where the modern Cambodian state is trying to exert its control and management in quite an explicitly aggressive way in some cases. But there's a very different story, I think, and this is part of the central key part of our research, is that rather than looking kind of from the perspective of states and the macroeconomic view, there's also an important story that comes from below, from the people that actually live there. So from the people that we talk to and we collaborate with, states are not a space that cause anxiety that need to be governed by states, but there are places and spaces that are abundant with the materials that sustain them, as well as the commodities that kind of generate income for them, or which can be traded. So forests are not just mere kind of homogeneous peripheral spaces, but they're crisscrossed with hunting and trading routes that connect up villages and regions. And importantly, of course, they're also places that are rich, full of meaning in relation to the spirits that people worship. So in past centuries, Prelong, believe it or not, which is considered now as a very kind of remote, or until recently, it was kind of considered as a fairly remote area of Cambodia, forested area, that there hasn't traditionally been very good road access. But actually, the ancient history of Prelong is that in many ways it was central to some of the ancient civilizations and some of the ancient cities. Temples from the Chandler period, which was pre-Angkorian, kind of located around the edges of Prelong, mostly in what are now Goi villages. One of the earliest Khmer cities, the Chandler area Sample Barak complex, located in the western bank of the Mekong, is in what is now Sambor district, where I currently am right now. And also on the edge, on the western edge of Prelong, you can also see temples from the same era, like Sambor Pre Cook, which is another important Chenla era kingdom, which has now become a major kind of attraction and part of cultural heritage. On the northern edge of Prelong, and this is the photo in here, is another temple called Prasat Kana, which is a lot less well known about, but once again was a really important key site of the early Incursion civilization. So there was a major population actually kind of within what was until recently Prelong. And apart from these kind of three main temple complexes on the east, on the north, and on the west, there's plenty of sites actually within Prelong itself. So the story we're kind of getting is that at one period in the early Chenla period and also in the pre-Incursion period, Prelong was not a remote and peripheral forest. It was actually a key site filled with villages, filled with religious sites, and filled with kind of trading routes. But if we compare contemporary Prelong to other spaces within other forest areas in Cambodia, it is quite unique for a few reasons. One is that unlike most of the forested areas that are kind of on the edges, on the border areas of Cambodia and the mountainous terrain, Prelong is kind of dead smack in the middle of the Cambodian state. And it's also flat. It's also predominantly flat. I just tried to give this little image here just to show how flat it actually is. And here you can see the only major mountain, Phnom Ji, which I can just almost see from where I'm sitting right now. But it's relatively flat overall. And for this reason, part of the contemporary land use change we're seeing is a rapid conversion to kind of cassava and cashew and rubber in some parts. So there's also been a long history of this area kind of being used by different forces who are trying to either oppose or to escape the state. In particular, it's been an important habitat for guerrilla warfare. So those opposing the French colonial state, like the various Issarat forces that were operating in the French period and the Sihanouk era in the 1960s, they often made Prelong as a base for them, and then they kind of regroup with inside the forest and to escape from the surveillance forces of the state. When the Khmer Rouge started to gain momentum, they also used Prelong as an important site to kind of organize and to recruit villagers and conduct guerrilla warfare. And in fact, even after the Khmer Rouge collapsed, Prelong remained a really important space for the Khmer Rouge right up until the mid-1990s. So they were conducting their kind of second life, as what it's called, in the 1980s and 1990s, where they continued to conduct guerrilla warfare from Prelong and go into areas that were controlled by the government. So you can see that, and even before that, even before the French colonial period, I just heard from an old villager yesterday telling me that Prelong in the French era, and even before the French era, from what his grandparents told him, used to be a place where thieves and bandits kind of roamed freely. So Prelong has always been this kind of interesting space. It has an intriguing relationship with state territorial power. It's both been at the center of historic states and is literally in the middle of contemporary Cambodian state, yet also simultaneously it's been a place where state power withers and fades and has long been a haven for those escaping state power, whether autonomous Goi villages, militants, revolutionaries, bandits, or those simply seeking out new lands. And perhaps it's this kind of historical ambivalence of Prelong as both a historic area of state power as well as a place of those opposing the state that causes so much anxiety for the current Cambodian state, who really wants to manage it, and as well as the Western donors who support the Cambodian state, who really want to see this area kind of managed under a rational bureaucratic state. So now I just really want to quickly kind of consider the people and their history of, or the history of livelihoods in the region of Prelong, with a particular emphasis on the way that people have come to Prelong to live kind of relatively autonomously from the state and from a larger kind of emerging capitalist system. Many people I talked to throughout Prelong spoke of resettlement of old villages and the establishment of new villages as inherently risky and direct and indirect opposition to the state. So what we've kind of seen in Prelong is that the recent history is that after the Khmer Rouge collapsed during the 1980s and 1990s, many of the villages around Prelong were evacuated out to larger population centers. But in the early 1990s, kind of people from around the region tried to restart their old villages and in some cases restart new villages on the land and within the forests that provides them subsistence. So for instance, in Sandan district's Tumring commune, there's mixed Khmer and Goi villages who for generations known about the presence of precious minerals such as gold, diamond, and iron in and around that small G throughout the or even recruited by the original, satisfied with the cooperative rice system, would sneak into Phnom G and do artisanal mining where they would trade gold for basic commodities. Over time, this led to settlement of Phnom G, which still exists today. Similarly, in Stang Trang's Siambok district, the population after the Khmer Rouge was evacuated over to the east side of the Mekong, as well as to some of the islands actually in the Mekong, on the Mekong. Yet during the 1980s and 1990s, of course, the people from these villages were very eager to re-establish their old rice fields and also clear some lands for farming of different crops. So what they did is they'd sneak over out from away from the surveillance of kind of the local authorities, and they started to re-establish their old farms and establish new ones on the West Bank. And slowly over time, starting from the mid-90s, these turned into villages. So it's kind of interesting that in many ways, the authorities really were unable to kind of stop people from living in and around Prelong. Due to their persistence, they kind of successfully re-established as well as established newer villages. And this goes for Goi, indigenous Goi people as much as Khmer. And kind of part of that recent history of people being evacuated away from Prelong and living out, slightly away from the center of Prelong and from the margins of Prelong meant that many of the villages today have this mixed characteristic of kind of Goi and Khmer. So there's similar stories that I've kind of come across from across the 4 different provinces in Borevihis, Rovian, and Jason districts. People tell similar stories. So I think the really key important thing, though, was that the forests were able to provide subsistence livelihoods for people. And this is what really attracted people back to the forest. It meant that the forest was kind of a haven for people where they could, participate in cattle raising, resin collection, artisanal logging, mining, and hunting. And that was enough to kind of provide them with enough subsistence to kind of get by. And in addition to that, they could do a little bit of trading on the side. And that's a kind of process that's still ongoing today. You can still see people trying to kind of escape the pressures of some of the lowland provinces, where there's a lot of economic pressures and where there's also state pressures. So people kind of trying to come to carve out a new life and livelihood on the edges of Prelong. So that's kind of an ongoing process that's been going on right up until today. So you can especially see this process of land use conversion on the south and eastern sides of Prelong, which are closer to the populated areas of Kompok Tom province and Kompok Jam. People have also turned to logging at various times in the past few decades, whether the Goi villages or the Khmer migrants who are coming to make a life in Prelong. And so logging and land clearing is kind of a strategy to gain autonomy, whether and to kind of escape the pressures of a capitalist system, especially in the lowland provinces. So this is part of the reason why so many villages are kind of also intermingled between Khmer and Khoi, because you're kind of seeing people come to escape from around the edges and come to particular areas that are rich in forest commodities, whether it's wood or resin or other things. So in that sense, it's important not to be overly romantic or nostalgic about the expansion of small farms on the edges of Prelong, as conservationists are often so prone to doing, because based on what people in Prelong actually tell us, many sympathize with the land poor who are trying to make a life out of the forest. And in fact, that's one thing that many of the small-scale farmers across the 4 provinces share in common. What they really have disdain for, though, are the administrative processes and state elites that gain from these newly formed land markets and the speculators that follow in their trail. So too with logging. Even some of the conservationists we work with who have dedicated their lives to protecting Prelong at times have also dabbled in logging, sometimes to get much needed income. But what people really have disdain for are the state-linked monopolies that kind of criminalize local people for land clearing and logging while opening up vast patches of the forest to unabated logging. The current clampdown by the Ministry of the Environment on local land clearing and logging is particularly also contentious and very much criticised by local people in and around Prelong. So you can kind of see in a way that Prelong provides almost a safety valve for people. It's a place where people can, who might have lost their land or who are land poor, can kind of come and live a semi-subsistence life on the edges of Prelong. They can clear some land, and they can grow a variety of different crops, as well as kind of using the bountiful environment within Prelong to sustain themselves, whether it's rivers or forest commodities or forest goods, hunting, etc. Like all those things are really important for providing a subsistence space for the people that live in the area. So there's a lot of pressures that people are currently facing. There is this big effort by the state to kind of manage and regulate Prelong in a way that's never happened before. The Ministry of Environment is kind of penchantly excluding local groups from Prelong and excluding their and preventing their conservation activities. At the same time as in the recent history of agricultural plantations. But even within these intense pressures, there's still elements of resistance. People's desire to live autonomously on, even as the state tries to force it to formally register. People clear their farms at night to avoid the Ministry of Environment, who says they're not allowed to expand their farms. People across the region often still reject how they're kind of migrating. And people we also see a resistance to things like debt and labor migration and labor work. So these two things that are kind of hallmark of a capitalist mode of relation across most of the lowland provinces in Cambodia, which people in Prelong are still resisting to growing, and even cassava growing, to help them maintain these semi-subsistence livelihoods. Resin tree owners have also become militant in their protection of their trees, and in a few cases even successfully evicted the Ministry of Environment from those patches of forests where their resin trees grow. So again, when we look through the lens of autonomy, living in this untouched natural wilderness, kind of sheltered from the state and market, but people who really fully understand how states and capitalist system works, and who are trying to live this subsistence life out in Prelong, away from those pressures, and really in some ways kind of almost fighting back against these systems by holding on to and fighting for these kind of autonomous livelihoods. Okay, I might just end it there for now, and I'll let Courtney continue on from here.
Hey, that's great. That's great. Thanks so much, Tim. That it's so so nice to hear your version of these elements. And so, Jaimin, if you can please share my slides, and we'll just start where I left off on slide number 5. And we're getting a little bit close to time, and there's a lot of super interesting questions. So I'm going to just kind of quickly close up what we're talking about here. Okay, so what we want to try to do is to document the Kui version of this history. And really not just Kui, but Kui and Khmer, the people that have been living up next to and intimately with the forest. And so they have a particular view on what this project, this history, this progress, and the development of their neighborhood that is important for people to know, that is different than the version that many of the development donors and the international corporations, especially the conservation corporations, are trying to tell us about what's going on in the forest. There's another story to be told here about land use and history. And by following their lead and picking up the research projects that they say are important, we might be able to disrupt this fancy narrative. So the powerful actors are not always human. They often are. We're seeing them now, corporations, conservation, development banks. But we expect that this alternative version of history is going to invert our contemporary fetish of nature. Nature as a thing that is separate, that is vulnerable, and in need of protection from us. Well, in a world where the land, the swamp, the stream, the islands, and the hills are all regularly part of the social community, we can see where the power really lies. It is not a deeply mystical relationship that people have with these elements. This is an empirical relationship and a powerful one. The fact that there are still large trees at these potent places is not because of superstition and fear. It's because accidents happen there. Yeah, often fatal accidents when loggers for hire attempt to take them, which at the resource frontier, they are most certainly trying to do. So this decolonized research agenda came out of the confluence. Well, in general, historically, the decolonized research agenda came out of the confluence of researcher anxiety and community refusal in the context of extractive academic research. We're finding that it is also super effective in other extractive environments. Next slide, please. And we are going to try to tell this story as we're going to try to tell the story from the vantage point of an alternate reality that is palpably and deliberately silenced in the rush to document, classify, and rationalize. Do not be fooled by these claims to undo the colonial and even deeper imperial structures of status, access, and rights, and magically make the toxic foundations of the research agenda and the development agenda disappear. One of our colleagues recently said to us in reference to other external interlocutors, but it could just as easily have been us. When the boat leaves, the port stays. And this is salient at a number of levels. His direct meaning was that he has to live with the troubles that come from opposing the inequality at the heart of the scramble to squeeze capital from the earth. At another level, he knows what's happening in the port. The traveler sees only snapshots, and even then, he easily misunderstands their significance. seeing only what is relevant within and between the boats. And it's still another level, and always palpable, is the terrible gap between his life and mine. I live in a boat built by capital that protects me from the elements and takes me to and fro. These elements against which capital is a shield, oh yes it is, they are the very elements potent in place that fuel sociality and fecundity, and are addressed in Cambodia as lokta. They are also the foundations of capital, which will burn itself out as this adaptation continues. And we hope to continue documenting it. So that is the end of our talk. Thank you all very much for your time and energy. And I will look forward to answering some of the questions.
Thank you both for the fantastic presentation. Yes, let's now move on to the Q&A session. We have a lot of questions for you from the audience. So let me compartmentalize two of our questions together. And your first question to you both is going to be focusing on the methodology. Let me scroll up. Okay, so could you elaborate on the methodologies applied, particularly given that research is endogenously given, engaged, and collaborative? In other words, who were the people whom you collaborated with? What were the eco-cultures guiding this engagement? And how did you work with them? Courtney, do you want to take the first stab at this question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for asking that. We've been engaged, have been engaged with people in this region for quite some time. And it started in work to investigate climate change mitigation and adaptation policies and strategies that were landing on the ground in the places where people worked. So we started a research project with an already active group of individuals that called themselves the Prelong Community Network. And we talked to them and asked them what the issues were. We told them what we were trying to look at, and listened to what they said. Then we helped to train them in some research methodologies and some new technologies. This was also happening, interestingly, 2 academics came to pray in Prelong and the people of Prelong at the same time. So I was working on a project with the Regional Center for Sustainable Development in Chiang Mai and the Institute for Social Studies in The Hague. And my colleague Ida was working at the University of Copenhagen. And both of us came in and we had our own kind of research projects in mind, and we wanted to talk to local people. And the people were terrific because they were very clear about what they wanted and what was important to them. So they were like, to Ida, who wanted to gather bio data on biodiversity, they were like, yeah, we can do biodiversity, but there's a lot of forest crime going on here, so we need to do that first. We'll get your biodiversity stuff in the meantime, but we have some documentation that needs to happen. And for us, they didn't have to change our research agenda, but what wound up happening is we did some training and we talked about some of the things that we can do and some methods for gathering powerful data, right? Effective data. And then we got calls. They were like, hey, this thing is happening. This is really cool. And we want to document it. So we would say, oh, well, okay. And that activity even created some new technology needs. Oh, you want to document that? Well, that's cool. Well, we're going to need this and we're going to need that. And so we put those things in and we worked together to kind of play around and see if we could make it work. And then they took it. And they did the data, they did the gathering that they needed to do, shared it with us, and we did some of the interfacing. I mean, harassing bureaucrats, that is a thing. That's a thing that academics can do. So that's how it happened, and that's how it's kind of continuing to emerge. Tim, what thoughts do you have on that one? Or I'm sorry, Panwin, I'm not facilitating this. Go ahead.
It's okay, Tim. Do you have anything to add to Courtney's response?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting process kind of working and trying to establish some sense of kind of it's fantastic that Courtney has such a long and deep relationship with the people there. So that's really something that helps. So I think the fact that people kind of know Courtney and have this long relationship, and even myself a few years ago, 10, 15 years ago, when the environmental activist D was around, I used to sometimes go out. And so we kind of have our friendships with people around them, and kind of makes it feel a bit more genuine.
All right, okay, let's move on to the second question. We actually have a lot of questions from both of you, so I'm gonna speed this up because we have about 11 minutes left. All right, the next question also pertains to the data. What data on hunting or trade routes cohere around Phnom Kulin? I got as far as Sambor in 1989 on military helicopter, gathering traces related to Khoi elephant hunting. Are there Hmong Khmer speakers who remember quitting the elephant hunting complex but preserve some river traces and tales of relating to the forest elephants?
Okay, I think that just a little bit. That story is emerging slowly. Most of the people that we've found that have real memory of relationships with elephants and some of what they were doing. I see that that Jeff asked that we do have evidence of habitation in this area for thousands of years. But we're not seeing a really strong history of the ancient work with elephants and how that decreased over time. But there are definitely whispers of it, and it's on our agenda. And so we're hoping that this will emerge more as we continue to hang out with people and meet. You know, the older the person is, then the more memories they have of that. One of the interesting things that I think will happen is we have some colleagues that are working in Laos and in Thailand, in this kind of borderland where there's Kui people and histories that are a little more isolated. And so we might find some more memories there, but it's an excellent question. And I don't have a solid answer for you yet, but we're definitely hoping that this will emerge. Elephants are important in forest relationships. Thanks.
Got it. Okay, next question.
Add one tiny
Sorry, yes, do you have anything to say, Tim?
Yeah, just yesterday though, that is an interesting question. I just went out to a village yesterday called Kompong Damrei, and it means like elephant pier or something like that. And it's a Goi village. And I asked people about it, and they said no one can remember it. Even the old people there can't remember it. But there was a time when that was used to, this is in Sambor and Kache, it was used to transport elephants from Prelong across to the east bank of the Mekong. So yeah, there's definitely some.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, next question. Could you elaborate on the geolocation of thonic power? In addition to spiritual energies, have you thought about using GIS geothermal seismic layer data underlying electromagnetic activity, for example, over time animations of the intersection of spiritual sites and the so-called power vortex would be interesting.
Oh my gosh, I love that question. Are you a geologist? Would you like to come and work on our project with us? When we write the next grant, we'll put you in as a partner. Yes, definitely. We've thought about it. We're just looking for the right expert that can come in and help us do that research. Tim, what do you think about that?
Sounds good to me. Yeah, sure. Definitely keen.
No expertise on that one. I was just thinking maybe you had another, piece of expertise in your pocket. So we're looking for the right expert. Let us know.
All right. I'll send you the author of the question.
Thank you.
The name of the author. All right. Okay. So next question: Where would Kuwait villagers get arsenal metal work or the art or the cart that can be disassembled to cross the ridge, then reassembled?
I'm sorry, Panwin. Can you say that one again? I didn't quite catch that.
Yes, I don't quite know if I pronounced that correctly, because if I read it and think about it in Thai, that's a bad word in Thai. So I'm a little bit hesitant to say that word, but let me try to read out this sentence again. Where would Kuwait villagers get their artisanal metal work or the cart that can be disassembled to cross a ridge, then reassembled? Does that make sense? Or maybe the author can elaborate on this a little bit, and then I'll come back to this question.
Well, I guess, I can answer it a little bit. There's a lot of artisanal metal gathering in and around Punumji, and up in the north. There's a lot of gold around Punumji, and up in the north there's a lot of iron, Punum Dike, but I'm not sure about the dissembling and crossing a ridge, because like Tim was saying, in this region, this really is flatland. There's not a lot of ridges. And so yeah, I'm not sure if I can answer that. Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's all flat. There's plenty of old paths through the forest, but there's not really any mountain except for the north crossing over into Thailand. But even then, there's passes that people can go through.
All right. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next question. And this one, okay. So the question is, do you have any views on how Kuwait or the migrant Khmer engage with development programs aimed at raising value chain? I knew about creative industry support program back in 2012. Are there any new initiatives going on today? Do you have a view on them?
So in terms of creative industries, really what we're seeing from the development banks and the international conservation organizations are things like finding markets for resin, even as the trees are being cut down, for creating like local gardening projects and stuff. There's creative industries and this kind of push to connect people to markets is difficult, and it's really fraught. And part of why it's so difficult and fraught, I think, is because it often comes from the outside, and nobody goes to hang out with people to see what industries they would do, right? And tries to, like, the issue is that people are already doing stuff. That's what Tim was trying to get at. They are busy, man. They are in there, they are making a living, and they are doing stuff. And so if we want to do creative industries, then you have to go in and spend some time with people first to see what they're actually doing, and then support what is already happening. Don't try to make something new happen, because that is not going to work. Right? You can't, you know, certain crops don't grow in particular soils. So, okay, that's my thing. Tim, do you have something else to add on that?
Oh yeah. So resin after Khmer Rouge, the kind of a resin commodity chain emerged based on the border area, Kampong Lao with Laos. So in that, and that's in kind of the mid 880s. From most people, what a
All right. Okay. We have a lot of questions left, and we have 2 minutes. So I'm
that's when
gonna.
they
Sorry. We have some technical
back.
difficulties.
Just a bit of lag. Found when you can keep going.
All right. Okay. I'm gonna move on to the next question. I will try to squeeze in 3 more questions, and I think that's the maximum we can go for. Okay. Next question. According to recent reports, over 100,000 hectares of forest has been cleared from PL forests since 2000, with environmental defenders threatened and harassed by the state. So Kevin is wondering how this political economy of state-backed extraction sites, with your narrative of communities in PL residing beyond the state as if autonomously. It feels to me like 2 desperate narratives describing different places and reality.
That is an excellent question. And yes, in fact, what we have going on here are 2 different narratives describing 2 different realities. And the one reality is visible. They're both visible. They're both visible. The more time you spend with people as they're doing what they're doing, the more the autonomous narrative begins to emerge. And this is, of course, the case everywhere, right? The more time you spend with someone, the more you begin to understand what kind of a story they are living inside of. But they both are certainly happening. And right now, we're all just waiting to see how this is going to play out. Thanks.
Got it. Okay, next question. Do you see any intergenerational differences in the way that Khoi people in Prelong forest negotiate with traditional and modern way of lives and livelihoods?
Oh, definitely. Yes, yes. The young people are, they are headed towards what looks like the provider of resources and livelihoods, which is the global market. And they can see, but not quite clearly enough, that this global market is in fact eating up the possibilities for life and livelihood. But nonetheless, that narrative is really, really strong, and young people are heading there. But not all of them. There are a number who are seeing clearly what's starting to happen. And so part of what we're hoping will happen, because the youths have much more facility with these technological things and with tracking and GPS and videos, and the elders have all the stories. And so one of the things that we're hoping is going to emerge even more as we continue with this project is more conversations between the young and the old, and to kind of fill in some of the blank spaces for both of them, right? Because they do live in different worlds. Tim, what do you think? Oh, one more question, sorry.
Yeah, I think I can see there are a lot of changes, but I was just out in a Khoi village yesterday here in Sambor, and the young people are still as much as possible, trying to preserve their intangible cultural heritage, whether it's, the sacred forests that are guarded over by Netta, or whether it's kind of traditional rotation systems. Young people are still just as kind of eager to try and protect that as the older people. But of course, they have all sorts of difficulties that they face in doing that. And of course, people are pushed towards new market-based crops like cassava, but still at the same time, they're trying to adapt that to a semi-subsistence traditional livelihood rather than kind of just throwing everything away. So yeah, it's quite obvious.
Okay, thank you. One last question. Based on Paul Levy's work, we know that prehistoric complex with 3 localities, Oyak, Opai, Ken, and Onari, dates back to Cambodia's late Bronze Age, early Iron Age, 3,200 years ago. If this is the same site, have villagers viewed this site as ritually important? Farmers in some other Southeast Asian countries view prehistorical stone as amulets. I wonder whether we see the same situation in Cambodia.
That's nice. That's a really nice question. Yes, this is the same Malu Pre. People have been there for a really long time, and they are aware of this and they talk about it. Tim might have some discussion of amulets and smaller things that are found in the ground. But what I know is that any place where there is evidence of building, where there's evidence of these ancient states and of previous habitation, these are all sites that become vectors for chthonic power. And it's a part, the way that I'm starting to understand it, it's so obvious for people who are doing it, and it takes a long time for the outside researcher and a million questions to figure out what's actually going on. But when a person takes a piece of earth, which is itself conscious of its own presence, and fashions it into something else, especially when it is stone, then there's a dynamic interaction between these two things. And this interaction, Bataille talks about this, Georges Bataille, in his theory of excess, right? There's something else happens when we work with the earth and its materials, its metals, its woods, its plants, its fibers, its animals, and power happens there. And so when one encounters a place where people have obviously been doing this kind of interaction, then it is understood to hold some power in it, because obviously that would have happened as the rock and the person, as the tree and the person were working together. Something would have happened. And so, yes, we definitely see it. Tim, I mean, I've seen this mostly in terms of place-based stuff, buildings, remnants of buildings. Tim, have you heard anybody talking about amulets and smaller things that they might find in the ground?
Yeah, I've heard a little bit of people just kind of talking about things that they've found in particular areas that are governed over by Netta. And interestingly, it seems to be that, just like what Courtney said, that Netta and the spirits always seem to come first. And so even if you do have this ancient presence of kind of the remains of states, for people, the spiritual significance, often they seem to see it as part of Netta, rather than kind of an ancient Khmer state. I was very interested recently when I took some elders from some Goi villages from Bromer to see the temple, Pasat Kana, which I showed a picture of. And they didn't really have any particular significance for it beyond the fact that it was a kind of a site that, might have a spirit within it, but it was certainly no more important than the shrine to the local spirit. So the way that these kind of ancient states are subordinated into kind of local stories of Netta is very interesting.
Got it. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. We cannot get through all of the questions, but we can relay your questions to the speakers after the session, and perhaps Courtney and Tim will be able to answer those questions afterwards. But thank you very much to both Dr. Courtney Work and Dr. Tim Frewer for sharing your fascinating insights in Cambodia. And I would like to also extend our big thanks to all our online audience for the very active and rich discussion and questions this afternoon. And again, I would like to invite you to our next EWC Insights for a talk by Dr. Ming Lee Yong on March 16th. And thank you again for being here with us, and have a wonderful rest of the day, everyone. Goodbye.